Hi everyone. So I've had multiple requests for sort of a checkpoint system with kind of lap incrementing, and so I finally got around to digging up kind of a little older demo that I came up with and kind of putting it together in something that I could package up in a Unity, little simple Unity project here, and put it up for download in the video description. So y'all have a direct download for this project. But I'm going to kind of walk through it a little bit, some of the scripts, some of the objects in here, and it'd be really helpful to kind of understand what's doing what in here so that you could kind of swap out my level, my car with your own 3D car or whatever, and just figure out how to kind of modify it and set it up to work with your project. So basically I'm going to hit play. We're going to kind of just look at how it works. I have these kind of visual indicators for the checkpoints here, and I have just a little bit of a car here that I drive through, and as you can see, the checkpoints are incrementing as I pass through them, and the visual aids they're kind of updating visually too to show us where the next checkpoint is. I kind of stink at this game, and then we increment to lap 2. This is actually the first checkpoint right here, which also is the start finish line. As you can see, I can cross over it multiple times, and it's still saying, hey, this is the checkpoint you need to hit before I'll increment. So this is a really good system for preventing the cheating, where you can back up and cross back over your start finish line and kind of increment laps that way. So this is your little safety key, your little backup to make sure people pass through. Now, you don't have to use 4 checkpoints like I did. Well, I'll show you here in the future that you can use 20, 30, whatever. It's going to create our script creates a customizable array, which is kind of just like a list where you plug in how many checkpoints you want. So for this example here, this will totally work in your 3D games, 3D camera behind the car with a full 3D model, 3D environment. But for simplistic purposes, we have this is just a polyplane. It has a texture on it, 960 by 640, kind of iPhone Retina display, and it's just a big Photoshop PSD that's in the project folder of a track, and I went in there and kind of just painted a track real quick. And then the car is also just a little sprite. It has no depth to it. A camera only sees it from above. So on the sprite, see if we can, see if we can't see here that it just has shadows and stuff like that faked into it. And it's actually in a big container here, well, not big, called player, also tagged as player. And inside of that player container is our sprite and our little wheel colliders, which are just built-in Unity wheel colliders. They're in here. They're in component physics and wheel collider right there. They're really neat and easy and fast to make wheels in Unity. And of course there's a box collider around it so that we bump into other cars or walls or something like that. And the player object has a rigid body on it too. You can check all that out when you open up the scene or whatever and look in it. We're not really going to dig too deep into the player vehicle because it's kind of a means to an end. I really just want to demonstrate the incrementing of the checkpoints, but kind of in order to do that, I have to have a car that you can drive around and kind of roll through them. So it's if you've looked at my creating a drivable vehicle in Unity tutorial, this is pretty much almost identical to that car, except this uses a 2D sprite and not a 3D model of a car. It doesn't have 3D wheels and a 3D body and all that. So pretty standard script. If you want to adjust stuff on the fly, steering strength, I've just put in a variable to let you kind of tweak how sharp the car will turn. At a steering strength of 30, you could cut the wheel really hard and the car will turn on a dime. Steering strength of 18 is pretty average, and lower than that the car would kind of understeer or whatever and be very sluggish on steering. Engine torque is the only other one you may be interested in adjusting, and it kind of how much horsepower does it have, get up and go torque, taking off from a stop. It's a box collider on it. An audio source that we're not actually using yet, but it would have like an engine motor sound in it or something. And then simple velocity limiter, which is another script I have in here, and it's included in the project. Very cool. Kind of limits the velocity of this rigid body right here, or anything, 3D car, 2D car, whatever. Kind of limits it to these numbers. It says, well, where do we start dragging? At what velocity do we kind of start putting drag on the rigid body? And we say, all right, velocity of 32. And then what's the max velocity where the drag would be maxed out? And it kind of just goes up. And we can say, oh, only apply a partial drag, 0.65, whatever. And basically, it just keeps your player car from being able to infinitely just zoom, 200 miles per hour. This caps the car to realistic cap, so you can play with it to get the speed that you like. Set it a little higher if you want a car that can go 120 miles an hour. Our car here kind of goes like 50 miles an hour or something like that, so I have these lower numbers. So that's pretty much the player vehicle. Now to get into the checkpoint system and that functionality, on whatever player vehicle you create or use, whether it's a 3D car you build or this 2D one here in game, you will apply this car checkpoint script here in the scripts folder. And this is basically, we're going to pop this open real quick. And well, we'll look at it while it's opening. So we have this thing called checkpoint array, which is an array in Unity, and it's really like a list, and by default it would be kind of 0. Nothing would be in there. But we set it to 4 because I had 4 checkpoints I want to pass through. If we had 20 checkpoints, you could type 20, and the script wants to keep opening. Okay, give you what you want. So we could have 20, and they'd need to be in there in incremental order. We have 1, this is checkpoint 1, checkpoint 2, checkpoint 3, and 4. So as they're applied to this player thing, they need to go in order. So 5 would go here, 6 would go here, 7, and so on and so forth. And they're in order that you would pass through them to kind of increment your laps or whatever. And of course, checkpoint 1 is basically the start-finish line. It's basically that. The other thing too is you don't even need to use these visual aids. You can literally shift select everything and turn the mesh renderers off, and I'll hit play and we'll go through it. I'll wait for Unity for a sec, and you'll see I'm still hitting the checkpoints, but of course they're invisible, and I'm hitting the wall. So we passed checkpoint 2, blah blah blah. It's just kind of a cool visual aid for demonstration purposes to show you how it works. It kind of shows you the priority of, well, your next checkpoint is this. You pass through this, your next one's here. You can do all kinds of cool things with that, like kind of turn on an object, like maybe a light pole or like one of those drag strip light trees or whatever. Kind of turn something on or off on that. So no need to use the mesh renders. They can be invisible box colliders in here that you pass through, or they could be visible. The other important thing too is that each one of these is checked as is trigger. It's a box collider, but it's set as a trigger. So you drive right through it. It doesn't physically interact with my car. It doesn't cause my car to bounce off of it or bounce away or anything. It just drives right through it as if it was a volume. But it still detects when my car comes through. So it's a trigger. So it's very much like a detection volume. So we're going to go back here. These, of course, you just apply the car checkpoint script to your car incrementally wherever your car is going to drive along its path or environment. Place your checkpoints in here in a group, and of course set the size of the group for however many checkpoints you have. That's pretty much all you have to do on your car to set up the checkpoint system. Now I have my container, and then I have all my little actual checkpoint objects in here. They have a script applied to each one. It's just a single script, but it's applied to each checkpoint. We're going to open that up and kind of get a look at it. So the very first thing in here, we're not going to go too intense in the script, but static var player transform. Then it says, well, that player transform is going to be equal to a game object defined player. So there's our player. If something is ever broken or doesn't seem to be working, then maybe it's because your car is named something different than player. Basically, your root object that everything's inside of, or whatever here, needs to be named that. Or if it's named something else, like John's car or something, then that needs to be plugged in here in this script. It's looking for that to basically store that as a static variable, which is a variable you won't see exposed here in the inspector. But a static variable lets Unity internally keep track of this. It lets your game kind of behind the scenes keep track of it. So it knows from this little code section here what the player is. So then it can go into function on trigger enter. And as we saw earlier, is trigger, our colliders are all triggers, every single one of them. So we say, well, when we enter a trigger, other collider, now this little section, because this script is actually applied on the trigger object itself, it says, well, when something enters the trigger that's other, and another collider other than myself, which would be the car, or AI vehicle, or a rock, or any other thing that has a collider or rigid body on it that bouncing on the track and fly through this cube. So it says anything that enters that is another collider, other collider than myself. It says if it's something, this little exclamation point in front of the other just means if it's not something with the tag of player, then return, which means don't execute anything further down here. So it's Unity's way of saying, all right, an object's entered these checkpoints, these yellow checkpoints. We're going to compare the tag and see if that tag is player. If it isn't a player, like your player car, don't do anything. That's what return means. Don't do anything. So it's named player, and when the script looks for compare tag, it's comparing the tag of that game object. So that's actually right here, the tag. We have a tag called player. Unity has it built in by default. Just make sure your car, even if it's named John Car or Tim Car or something, make sure its tag is set to player. Okay? And the checkpoints I tagged as checkpoint 2. Absolutely not necessary, I don't think, for these scripts to function, but it's kind of good to keep things neatly arranged in the hierarchy. It's just kind of like the camera is also tagged main camera. It allows you to take the script and kind of look up tags. So it's basically going to say if something comes through here, and like if we had an AI vehicle in here or something, so we go game object create other. Let's do this real quick. We create a cube. Where is our little evil cube? There he is. That's our AI car, and then he's untagged, so we would tag him. We go up in here in tags, and we have an empty slot, enemy, and then where's our little cube? He's still untagged, and we would tag him enemy. So obviously, if enemy passes through here, if we didn't have this little bit of code to say if it's not tagged player, then return, then he would be able to increment your lap and your checkpoints. So kind of a little protection feature in the script. So okay, so if it is tagged, it's assumed that in the true state, which means if something did come through that was tagged player, then continue on down here. And this is a bunch of complex stuff about, well, if the transform, which is the player up here, it's a type of transform, basically a 3D point in space. If it equals player transform, which is what was assigned kind of up here, where are we? Then get its component car checkpoint. And get component just means, well, let's look at the object and see what components are on it and grab one called car checkpoint, which on our player vehicle we have all these components. And what do you know? One of the components right here is named car checkpoint. And it's a script, which it gets a little used to thinking of it this way, but a script is definitely a component of the game object. So it says, well, look into the car, which is your player transform, get its component, which is the script, and then inside of that script, look at the checkpoint array, and then look at the current checkpoint and kind of figure out where all those transforms are. So it's saying, look in the script, and here's the neat thing. So you say, look for checkpoint array or whatever. There's checkpoint array right there. So it's looking to ask for where all the checkpoints are when the level starts up. And then it's saying, all right, where's the current checkpoint, the one that the car's closest to, or the current one or whatever? Oh, that's this one right here. And these are those variables that were static that you didn't have any access to, but of course Unity is communicating back and forth between scripts and updating these. We're saying, all right, well, the current checkpoint actually when you started out is 0. There are none. Then it goes on, and it continues on, and it says, well, get into current checkpoint, add 1 to it when it starts up. So we do have a checkpoint. It's actually this first one, checkpoint 1. So we're going to add 1 under that 0. And it says, all right, so the first checkpoint would be checkpoint 1. And then it's just going in here, and this is the script again, and it's looking in the other script and saying, hey, find the length of that checkpoint array. Does it have 4 checkpoints in it? Does it have 12? That's what .length is. It's just the script's way of looking into it and saying, hey, how many checkpoints are they using? I used 4, so it would tell it, hey, we're using 4. If you're using 20, this length would tell the script, hey, he has 20 checkpoints. And then there's all kind of other weird code in here. It says if the car checkpoint script comes through and it's equal to the checkpoint's equal to 0, then add 1 to it. Add 1 to the current lap. Add 1. That's what this plus plus mean. It actually means in script language it means add 1, plus 1, whatever. And then it says else if we don't have any checkpoints, go back to 0 equals 0, blah blah blah. And then down here is our neat little visual aid, which is where where it allows you to see this 3D text right here, which I did use 3D text. You can update like GUI elements or GUI text or fonts, all that stuff. But I just used 3D text mesh. That worked for me. So it says, all right, so start the function visual aid right here, which actually makes it skip over and come down here and execute this. And this is just going back into that object in alpha, get component, checkpoint array, find all the objects in the checkpoint if you assign 20 or 4, and all those objects have a renderer attached to them with the material, which we put on it, what's called checkpoint material, and make the color.a, which is the alpha component of that material, make it point to, fade it out. And then if the player's passing through them and incrementing checkpoints down here, it says, well, actually make the next one bright to let the player know visually this is the next checkpoint you need to seek. So if your track kind of isn't like all on one screen like this one is, where I can see all checkpoints at once, this would be kind of cool if there's a checkpoint in the distance and you kind of need to visually see where it is, because maybe you're in a 3D full roam environment and there's no like established track, but you see a bright glowing thing in the distance, oh, that's the next checkpoint. So whatever kind of block or thing would be glowing on the horizon would let you know to hit the next one. So it kind of helps you not have to have a linear path or track. Okay, so this executed to kind of help us with the visuals on our checkpoints, and then we update the 3D text on the camera. So it's camera main, which is just Unity's way of saying what is tagged in the scene as main camera. Just make sure that camera is tagged as that. It says, well, get components and its children. Very simple theory here and how that works. So it wants a component that exists inside of its children. Anything that's inside of a hierarchy, like all these checkpoints inside this is like the parent object, and these are all the children. Or the other way to look at it too is like this object, all these components here are also its children. They're children of this object, sort of. But anyway, I digress on that. So anyway, it's saying, well, let's go get components in the children on camera main, which is right here, which has a 3D text inside of it as a child object kind of parented inside of it. If it was loose outside of here, let's see if we hit play. We should see errors. It's not going to error out. That's very odd. It should be erroring, saying it can't find that child object. But anyway, moving on. Get the component in children, which is a text mesh, .text. And we'll say, by default, the words we want that text mesh to say are going to be checkpoint, a colon there, which is identical to what we see by default. And then we also want it to say lap colon blank and blank in there because we haven't really inserted a value. Now on the text mesh, I went in here and we can have it completely zeroed out like that, or checkpoint 0, and you can just type it in manually like that too. The important part of this is that it's saying, all right, well, this text object is going to equal the checkpoint colon plus the current checkpoint in the card checkpoint script. So we go back to card checkpoint. There's our current checkpoint value right there. So this is updating behind the scenes as you pass through checkpoints, and this number is changing in the script. You just don't see it happening in the editor. So it wants to grab that, and it will actually, since it has plus here, it will actually plug this right behind checkpoint. Therefore, this 0, that's how that updates. That's what's updating that as you pass through checkpoints. And the same thing happens for the lap. It says lap plus the car checkpoint script and current lap. Let's grab the value for current lap, which is right here. And so that's how it increments these lap and checkpoints on the 3D text there. Really simple how that works. Let me see if I haven't explained anything. So we've went over what the checkpoint objects are. They're all neatly in a container. They have mesh renderers on them, but they don't require the mesh renderers if you just want invisible checkpoints. They're all marked as triggers, so the trigger objects. If they're not trigger objects, well, it's not good. You'll see what happens here. We'll hit play, and our car will just smack into it and ram and not be able to pass through it. So we definitely always want to make sure that those are set to be triggered. We have our player vehicle, which you can create your own, roll your own, bring in Unity car, bring in EDU car, any of those car systems out there, and just make sure none of these other things matter. On your car that's already drivable, apply car checkpoint script right here, and then make sure to plug in all of your checkpoints into that. Player camera, that's basically going to be up to you. You can have your orthographic camera, or you can have a perspective camera following the car. You want to have your text mesh parented inside of the camera. Either way, if it's following the car, this way your text will stay with the camera and as you drive along and follow. The track plane, which is going to be custom for you. And then collision, which was just a collision mesh that I created in a 3D app. I believe Maya or whatever, and I kind of just traced over in Maya. I just traced over this photo. I kind of went into the top view in Maya and drew my, kind of modeled out my simple collision. It's completely invisible. I couldn't just use the track for collision because it has no walls to it, so it would work great for ground, but there'd be no walls. And the collision came in as a 3D model, and I took like mesh filter right here, remove component, mesh render, remove component. Obviously it just hid our track, but on my collision, when it came in, it had a mesh render and a mesh filter on it too. I just right click remove, and all I kept was the mesh collider, which also, when you look in here at your models, wherever you place them, I place them in a folder called models for your track or whatever. Generate colliders was turned off for my track. And then on my collision, which was to track one collision, separate mesh, I did check generate colliders and I hit apply on it or whatever. So make sure you do that if you want to bring that in. I'll revert that. I believe the other way you can do it too is just bring your model in, strip off the mesh render and mesh filter, and then go component physics and add a mesh collider. It's going to tell me I can't add it again because it's already added, but just add it to it and it'll make it a collider out of that invisible mesh. So that's a neat way to make your own custom collision. So I think I covered the camera, I covered the player, I covered the checkpoints. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to show, and it's unrelated to checkpoints, is I've included a little scene with some AI, and I thought, well, it'd be too cool not to kind of share this. The other little players kind of running around in the scene. Sorry for the lag here and everything, but so you can see I stink. The other little players are driving around. They're not incrementing checkpoints or laps, so it would be pretty simple if you understand how the theory works on the player car. It'd be pretty simple to integrate this on the AI cars and basically get the same scripts working right on them so they can increment checkpoints for themselves and they can increment laps for themselves as well. It's not a perfect system. These little AI guys, this is very simple. Some things need to be fixed, specifically with that little silver car. We're actually going to take a look here in the scene view, what's going on. They're just little sprites, just like, let's pull them up over here. They're just little sprites, kind of like, just like the player vehicle. They don't have wheels like the player vehicle because they're actually just kind of being dragged along a spline, which is this path. And if I drag it up, you can kind of see the connections. And all the little yellow things are like these waypoints. They're like these points in space that each one of these cars goes and it just tries to seek. You can see the little cyan lines that are showing where they're trying to seek the next waypoint. If you look real close, you can see the little red debugging lines. And that's kind of showing how far off of that racing line are they. And it helps kind of pull them back. It also helps them to like, it's kind of neat, but it also helps them kind of avoid other cars. I think like just the player car and stuff, so they can kind of avoid stuff. So they'll kind of scoot around like they're doing right there. And it's just like a sideways raycast. It kind of makes them a little bit of aware of how far off they are from the path. And the path, I'm not going to go deep in this. You guys will look into this and figure this out and debug it for yourself and how these AI cars are working and the scripts that are applied to them. Basically, it's the identical scene that we just had with laps and checkpoints, except I've added, let's see, the markers, the AI cars, and the path. I mean, if we delete them, we get pretty much we get identical to our working checkpoint scene we had earlier. I just wanted to, I'm going to undelete. I just wanted to throw those in so you guys had some AI to play with too. So we have a main scene with AI, I'm not going to save it, and then a main scene without. So it gives you a couple to work with and a kind of a cool little simple waypoint system, how a car will follow this waypoint. Let me see if I can't. I'll show you some information actually on the cars. You have a couple of variables you can change on the AI cars to make some of them more competitive than others. Speed and turn speed, basically how fast the car can move and how sharp and fast it can turn. As you can see, some of mine are set to different numbers to make the cars kind of go slightly different speeds and all that. Of course, you could change that dynamically. I'm actually going to slow the car down real good so you can kind of see what it's doing in slow motion. Let's turn that on. Okay, so there it is moving really slow, and it's just seeking, and it's just going from waypoint to waypoint, and it's just really a box collider that's sliding on the ground. There's no like real wheels or anything like that, and it's definitely probably a system you'll want to go in and try to refine or fix. Obviously, you can see sometimes the rotations are a little off. Depends on how simple or complex of a system you're looking for. So hopefully this helps you guys out and get you started with maybe some simple AI and get you started absolutely with a checkpoint lap system, because that's really the simplest part and could integrate into any scene. So hopefully this helps you guys out, and until the next tutorial.